Hi, I'm Art Benjamin, again, diversity and inclusion leader here in San Diego, California. I have with me today my friend, Kevin Martin, who is an incredible executive in the credit union industry. Thank you so much for joining us, Kevin.
Thank you for having me, Arthur. I appreciate the invite, and I'm always glad to have a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes. So we're going to be talking about Let's Talk Diversity. And we were talking a little bit about what the DEI role is within the organization, and then a little bit about the relationship that should exist between the DEI leader and the CEO. And so, Kevin, in your experience, you are currently, or you were working in the space of diversity, equity, inclusion within a credit union. Talk to me about what your perception is of the DEI role within the organization.
Yeah, so I think it's one interesting point that I like to make before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of what the diversity, equity, and inclusion leader does, is that every leader should feel that diversity, equity, and inclusion is their responsibility. That's really important, I think, for people to understand. Like, this isn't, it's kind of like member service or helping members. Like, it's not one leader or one person's job, it's everybody's job. It doesn't work if one person has to carry that by themselves. So that's one clarifying point just up front. And if I had to choose one leader, though, that leader has to be the CEO. If the leader's not the CEO's not on board, then there's nothing else to talk about because it won't be a priority. It's just too important of a topic, and for some, it can be a difficult topic. And so to make it a priority that's focused on and gets the attention that it needs, the CEO must be on board. But with that said, CEOs are very busy, so they clearly delegate responsibilities to trusted leaders. And so if you have one DEI leader, their role is, I call it the 3 C's. So it's clarity, connection, and content. Right, so the clarity, they need to have clear definitions on what does diversity mean? What does equity mean? What is inclusion? Because people come to the table with some preconceived notions based on their past, right? So you need to make sure you can have a common vernacular. They need to have a clear roadmap. So what are we gonna do? When we're gonna do it? And then a clear why. Why are we doing this? Be able to explain that succinctly. So that's the clarity. Connection. How does this connect to our strategy? How does DE&I support our mission? How is it going to impact our processes, our practices? That's really important, because that's where the rubber actually hits the road, right? This is not just an exercise in moral goodness. This actually has an impact on team member engagement, on member engagement, on financial performance, on innovation, on decision-making, all of the above, right? So make sure that you can make that connection for people. So it's not just some nice to do, we're nice people doing nice things for people. And finally, content. The content is leveraged to expand the knowledge base, right? To introduce best practices, to provide the leaders tools, so frameworks and models, so that they can leverage those tools when they talk to their teams, when they are making decisions. You know, simple things like asking yourself the question when a decision is made, who benefits and who's burdened? Something that I took from my friend Angela at CUNA Mutual Group. But those simple frameworks allow you to be more expansive in your thought process and who you're considering, who's going to be impacted by your decision, which is really the whole point of inclusion. So the 3 C's: clarity, connection, content.
Wow, clarity, connection, and content. Those are amazing. Those are absolutely amazing. If you were to give advice to someone just starting out as a D&I leader within their organization, what would you say would be some of the absolute important first steps they should be considering?
Yeah, good question. You know, a peer of mine, when I joined the credit union, used to tell me, seek to understand first. Like, you have all these great ideas, you know, best practices, but why are things in their current state? What's the history behind that? And then, I think it's Maya Angelou that said, and I hate to misquote Maya Angelou, so I apologize if I get this incorrect. But oh, dang, I'm missing out on it. It's something to the effect of nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care.
Oh,
That's
yes,
it,
yes.
right? And so if you come in saying you know everything, you want to change everything, nobody cares. You just got here. We don't know if you are part of the team, if you care about us, if you understand our culture, our mission. You have to gain that credibility first, right? So I think that's the first thing you got to do. If you walk into the door, any leader, but particularly the DEI leader, is to learn, seek to understand, engage people, understand where they're at in this journey, what are the challenges they're experiencing before you start to make any type of adjustments or changes. Another piece is alignment. I think you mentioned in our previous conversations we've had is relationship with the CEO. You got to be aligned with the CEO. You have to have clear objectives, clear strategies. You don't want any daylight between what you are doing and what the CEO understands and supports, right? Getting back to, this can be a difficult topic for some. People can question the why. So you don't want any daylight between you and the CEO. In addition to that relationship with the CEO, you need to be open. You need to be able to have the ability to speak freely. The two of you need to be able to challenge each other. And be comfortable having difficult conversations, because everything is not going to always be Pollyannish, not always going to be easy. So you need to be able to have those conversations, but based on an element of trust, right? It's like, we're doing this because we know it's best for our team, it's best for our members, it's best for the organization. But it's a tough topic that we need to have. The reaction to George Floyd is one of those examples. We need to have this difficult conversation about racism. And then the last part, and I can't stress this enough, and again, I always call it my big sister and my big brother at CUNA Mutual Group, to be resolute. You have to have resolve in this. It's going to be, you got to be clear on the why. Why are we doing this? You got to be clear on that, crystal clear. And because you're going to face headwinds, you're going to make missteps, you're going to get criticism, you're going to get all these things. And if, again, going back to that connection I talked about before, if you don't know how this connects to your strategy, how it connects to your mission, how it connects to member and team member engagement, when it's tough, when the going gets tough, you may say, why are we doing this? Or when it's time to have a difficult year financially, you may think to cut this first, right? So you need to be really clear on the why. And because to be prepared for those headwinds, to overcome that when you run into those challenges.
Wow. Kevin, that you just unpacked a lot. You just completely just downloaded so much in just that short span of time that hopefully our listeners and those who listen to this get a lot from that. I wanted to talk with you, and you already mentioned it, that we've had this in previous conversation, and you've gone into it already as far as the relationship between the CEO and the diversity leader. Talk to me a little bit about what do you think can be some of the strengths of that relationship, as well as what could be some possible challenges in that relationship?
I think the strengths have to be based on trust. Like when I was, playing that diversity, equity, and inclusion role, and again, the reason I say was, we have a new leader who is going to take the baton and take it way further than I was able to do it. So I'm looking forward to following her leadership. But with that said, when I was in that role primarily, it was that Friday night conversation with the CEO that was so important. It was that, let's talk at dinner and kind of just share our mutual experiences and our experiences that aren't common so they can better understand each other. And from that type of discussion, trust was developed. And to this day, that's why, I think I'm still in my organization, because I trust our CEO. I know that he gets it, and that means a lot to me. And that's very rare, I think, at least in my experience, in my professional career progression. And I can have an open and honest dialogue with him. And I really, really appreciate that. So I think the strength is you got to be able to have that open conversation, find a way to develop that strong rapport with your CEO. And, if she or he doesn't understand certain points, that's when I think that, that Friday night conversation when you're away from the office and just on the phone, or you go to dinner or whatever you may have it, allows you to go deeper than that 20-minute update that you do in the office.
That's huge. One of the things
Yeah.
I've always felt was that it was critical that the D&I leader have time with the CEO beyond just talking strategy. And I think that's what you're echoing right now is how important it is that you do hear each other, that you do understand each other, because again, that strengthens the trust between the CEO and the diversity leader. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. You also asked about challenges.
Yeah.
I think it's important for everybody, but I always try to put myself in the CEO's shoes. Like I always ask myself, should I tell the CEO something? And I was like, if I was the CEO, what I want to know? That's what I asked myself. If I was the CEO, what I want to know, right? And in this new environment where we're talking about credit unions uniting against racism, just as a topic, realize all the stakeholders the CEO must consider. Because it's real easy for, Kevin, black guy, to say we should be doing this and that should be it, right? Because I'm clearly impacted emotionally, physically by what happened to George Floyd. But realize that the CEO has to consider the members, has to consider the board, has to consider, depending on your type of organization, other constituents in the community. And so I'm not saying that should change the ultimate behavior, but if you want to have a trust and relationship with the CEO, I think putting yourself in her or his shoes and letting that reflect in your conversation with them that you've considered these items and you weighed the pros and the cons, I think also helps them trust you more. Because that can be real challenging. If you think through your myopic view that we should be doing X, but you haven't considered all the other constituencies, then the CEO can't really just follow your opinion, can't just trust your suggestion because you're not thinking about it from their perspective, because it could change the message, it could change the approach, it may require some pre-meetings before you go with the final message. And I think that's really important to understand, because that can be challenging for folks because people see things as black and white, and it's not black and white. There are some elements of gray that are there, but there's a clear right and wrong. But how you go about addressing right and wrong may differ from where you sit, right? So I've always said, and I'm always clear on this topic, I'm going to push us. I feel like that's my job. My job is to push us to be as best as we can. So I'm trying to get us to go 100 miles an hour, right? Once we get all the other executives in the room and talk to other leaders in the organization, talk to the board, talk to members, maybe we end up going 40 miles an hour. And realize that's still progress. That doesn't mean that I don't stop pushing for 100 miles an hour. I still make that argument. But there are other folks that need to be considered in this dialogue, and some folks that don't have the appreciation for the topic that you may have, right? Depending on where you sit, right? George Floyd is clearly a black-white issue, but we recently had, I think it was in June, where the Supreme Court made a really great and big decision regarding the LGBTQ community, right? And folks who identify as LGBTQ, I'm sure may have stronger feelings about certain topics than those that don't. And those that don't may not have the appreciation for how it negatively impacts that community, how it impacts lives every single day. And so part of this journey that we all take is to educate, to expose, to be vulnerable and tell your story so that folks can empathize and relate. And, you know, if you're working in a good organization or you're working with people who take their humanity seriously, they will relate and they will find a way to support. And maybe you go from 40 miles an hour to 50 miles an hour to 60 miles an hour. But it's a marathon, literally. So you have to just consider, you want to be effective ultimately. You want change to happen as your objective. So you have to be thoughtful and measured in how you approach that. So I don't know if that helps or not, but it's just understanding the various constituencies and stakeholders CEOs have to consider as they develop their response, I think is really important. And I think if you're somebody who works with the CEO and you can show that you've taken a balanced approach, they'll have more trust in you and your relationship will strengthen, which then gives you an opportunity to have more influence on the ultimate response and solution.
Wow. Again, Kevin, you just unpacked a lot in that short span of time. We're going to be closing. I have one more opportunity just for you to share. And I just want to allow you to share, what would you say to either the credit union out there or the diversity leader who has maybe made attempts to start this work? They've kind of started and had to stop, or they've started and realized it wasn't working. Any encouragement, any guidance that you would give to a credit union or diversity leader that just is in this space? It feels like maybe, they're trying to figure this out, they're fumbling through it. Any advice you'd give?
You are not alone. This work, especially at the onset, can be thankless. You can put tireless hours into it to not move at all or just move an inch. You start to see folks, whether they be conscious or unconscious biases that come forward, or their previous experiences with the topic that may have been negative come forward. So just realize that, a lot of folks work in a professional setting and everything is work. And some of these topics get quite personal. And so it can be very difficult for people to unpack them or even talk about them because they just don't talk about it. They've never talked about it. It's been best to avoid talking about it. So with that said, my advice to you is to find a community to engage with of like-minded individuals, because I think they will help to recharge you. Also, clarify your objective. So what you're trying to achieve, and separate that from your strategy, which is how you achieve the objective. Because perhaps the approach that you took, which you thought was the right approach, wasn't the right approach for that situation or for that organization or for that leader. And just like we talk about how diversity leads to better solutions, sometimes diversity in strategy is necessary as well. How I approach Arthur with a topic may be different than how I approach Jane or John or Jimmy. And you can collect those various best practices, different approaches, different strategies when you have a community of DEI practitioners that you can go to and engage with. And so I think that's probably the most important thing, is to have that community to go to when it comes to DEI best practices, and put it all in context, right? So just to share a bit, like I had a really hard time in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. I was scared, I was fearful, had anxiety. I've learned that trauma is not always physical, And so, you know, I had these thoughts that I couldn't control. So I had to, you know, get some self-care going for Kevin, right? Take some time for me. And so, but think about it, you know, 4 generations ago, 5 generations ago, you know, my family were in chains. We were slaves,
Yeah.
you know? So what I'm dealing with, although difficult, is nowhere in comparison to that. So put yourself into historical perspective. You have an opportunity here to influence, hopefully safely, physically safely, from your office or work area. And if those folks that came before you, and people have different backgrounds, people have, you know, come from various countries, but many have had much different, more difficult struggles than we are having right now. If they got through that and still created you, you can get through this. So just put it all in context, right? I started to study history more, you know, and understanding how we got to this point in history in America, in the world. And when you start to read what other leaders did in the past, what they went through in the past, you know, John Lewis, who just passed away, I've never been bopped on the head, right? I never was attacked on a bridge, you know, so, you know, I need to suck it up and get back to work, right? Because there's a lot of folks who have literally shed blood, shed their lives for me to be sitting here right now with you out there having this discussion, you know, within this great credit union movement, which we're trying to make better, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to prepare for the future.
Yes.
And some people get that and some people don't. That's the reality of it. But, you know, I think having a community is key. Putting yourself into historical context is helpful, at least for me, you know, and then when all else fails, you know, take the day off and go do something you like to do and come back later. The work will still be there, I assure you.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me for Let's Talk Diversity. I appreciated you setting aside this time to share with us. Everyone, Kevin Martin is SVP at Schoolsfirst Federal Credit Union. And Kevin, thank you again for joining us. Thank you for the dialogue. Thank you for the insight. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for inviting me out there, everyone. Continue to stay safe out there, and appreciate you taking the time to listen to us. Take care.
All right, please make sure you connect to Kevin on LinkedIn if you have not already. Thank you, Kevin.